This lecture deals with the Salem witch trials, which are occurring in New England during the 1600s. So they take place in Salem, Massachusetts from March to September of 1693. It's a very notorious episode in American history, but it is not exactly a long episode. And it's not significant that there were witches or anything like that. It's more significant the causes and what it kind of shows you about Puritan society. It is based mostly on the accusations of two girls, a girl named Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris. And under Puritan law, those who were accused of consorting with the devil, or witches in this case, were considered felons, and having committed a crime against the government, their punishment was hanging, although that's not the only way that they deal with these accused witches. So now let's start dispelling some rumors. They are not the first witch trials in American history, even up until that point, but it returned in 1602 and mass hysteria gripped New England. So they're the most prominent ones, but they had had issues with people accusing people of witchcraft earlier. And historians have attributed to the tensions that existed within the colonies, how Puritan values are being lost, and outside pressures from Native Americans with Britain are really the main causes of it. And it also shows, and that's why it's significant, it shows how powerful the loss of Puritan values and the pressures that these people were feeling eventually caused them to act kind of not normally and allows this hysteria to grip. So it's kind of a symptom of the larger issues. It's not the issue itself. So from 1692 to 1693, they execute more than 130 witches, and they were jailed or executed within Salem. And it's a group of teenage girls accusing these people in their colony of consorting with the devil, and they would make up stories. They kind of fake seizures within the courtroom, claiming that the person was controlling them or forcing them to do these things, or do illegal things out in the community as well. So what are the causes of this? Why does this occur? The first cause, and probably the most important cause, is that Puritans feared that their religion, which was believed to be the only religion according to them, was on its way out. They felt it was being less regarded by a lot of the people in the society as people were flooding into Massachusetts Bay and what was originally Plymouth as well. So why did they feel that it was on their way out? As more people are having children and having second and third generation Puritans, they didn't have the original kind of fervor or seriousness about a lot of the Pilgrim beliefs and Congregationalist beliefs. So they can kind of feel that the religion is getting diluted. And normally, a Puritan had to have some evidence that they were, had felt God's grace to be baptized by the church, and they were called visible saints, and they were the only ones who could vote or hold office. Those were people who had like a direct connection with God. As these Puritans get less and less serious about their faith, the second and third generation ones, those visible saints, there just aren't enough of them to hold public office and to vote to make decisions. So in order to keep the colony going, they had to kind of change the rules. So men in particular were losing interest in the church. The Puritan clergy decided to baptize any children whose parents were baptized. So you didn't have to show anything dealing with the church or God. You just had to have your parents had been baptized. So since they did not experience God's grace, they were not allowed to vote. This is called this halfway covenant. They are kind of halfway between being full-fledged citizens and not being, because they are baptized, but they could not vote. So obviously you see a problem here that eventually these halfway people are eventually going to overtake the colony, and just as other generations die off. And it's going to be a problem because then who can vote? So this is kind of a Band-Aid. It is not going to solve the problem. But it speaks to the larger problem that the Puritans were feeling. There's a dissolution of their religion, and it's not as serious as it was when they first came over here. So the other issue becomes Native American relations. So some of the accusers in the Salem witch trials were domestic servants who were orphaned in Indian attacks in Maine. So they had connection with Native Americans, or had lost grandparents from King Philip's War and King William's War. So they already have an issue with Native Americans, decimating their families. So New Englanders often feared a repetition of the devastation of King Philip's War. So for 8 months, witchcraft accusations took place in the areas most threatened by Indian attacks in southern Maine and northern New Hampshire. So these people who are making these accusations often had already had horrible experiences by these Native Americans. So as the Native American attacks become more possible or more likely, they bring up these these witchcraft, pronunciations to try to explain their fears and why they believe their life has been ruined or will be ruined. So even though it's coming from young women who are mostly powerless in the region, New Englanders start to believe kind of what they're saying because it explains some of the town's troubles, that the witches or the devil was here, and that's why things aren't going so well. That's why our religion's becoming less important, and that's why the natives are attacking us. So the girls also accused prominent men from the main frontier who had traded with or failed to defeat the natives. So it says, it's like, well, they had a good relationship with the natives, so they're bringing this witchcraft or devil worship on us, or they didn't defeat them, and therefore the Indians are sending their witches or their stories to us to scare us, and the devil is taking over our towns. So the last cause is this idea of the New England endured the autocratic control of the Dominion of New England. So Puritan New England was believed to be a hotbed of smuggling. So in 1685, when James II becomes king, he sought to bring order to what he saw as chaotic state in the American colonies. So he starts to send administrators over to New England, and they begin to chip away at the privileges that these people had experienced since 1620, when the first pilgrims come over here. So he started reclaiming proprietorships for the crown, making these things royal colonies. So we're starting to see the implementation of Anglican religion and Anglican political systems and social systems rather than what the original inhabitants of New England had, and therefore they feel like there needs to be some explanation for this change. So they use the idea of witchcraft to kind of explain this loss of their territory, this loss of their power. So this kind of explains this Dominion of New England. It includes most of what becomes New Jersey all the way up to Maine, which was part of Massachusetts at this time. And it would restrict colonial trade. They would defend the colonies, but their goal was to stop colonial smuggling. So we're already seeing in the late 1600s, about 100 years before the American Revolution, that the Crown in England is recognizing that there are issues with colonial smuggling, and they're not following the rules, and there's money to be made here. So they establish this thing so that they can possibly take control, get taxes going without consent of the governed. So that whole idea from the Jamestown charter that said they're treated the same as England, that's not there. They eliminate the town meetings, the press, and the schools, and institute their way of life. So Puritans especially are feeling like their lives are crumbling down around them. And you can also see why, Boston and New York become hotbeds eventually of the American Revolution, because Sir Edmund Andros, the person who's coming to become kind of the leader of New England, is taking away their rights, and they feel, whether religious rights or political rights or economic rights, they feel that this is wrong and that their life is crumbling down around them, which explains why they turn to witchcraft or the supernatural to explain this. So all the charters that made these colonies either proprietary or independent colonies are revoked from New Jersey to Maine, and Sir Edmund Andros becomes the governor of this Dominion of New England. He has no term limits, so he's basically a king. He dissolved all the assemblies, so there is no legislative branch, and he only needed the consent of the appointed council to make laws and levy taxes. So these appointed people are all appointed by the king, so they're all going to agree, so there's no problem making laws or levying taxes, but the people of this Dominion of New England have no say. So eventually the Dominion of New England comes to an end with this glorious revolution back home in England, where James II is removed for trying to be more of an absolute monarch in 1688, and William and Mary eventually replace him. They sign the English Bill of Rights to become a limited monarchy with a parliament, etc. And in 1691, Massachusetts becomes a royal colony under the new monarch. So we break up the Dominion of New England, but they don't necessarily get their rights, all their rights back. Suffrage is eventually extended to all Protestants. In New England or in Massachusetts Bay, it was only Puritans originally, so their views, they're a relatively small part of the population, so their views are just going to be drowned out by the majority who is there in New England, these other Protestants. So Puritan primacy is weakened, and it makes them uneasy. So again, they kind of feel between Native Americans, between the Dominion of New England, and between the issues surrounding Massachusetts Bay with this halfway covenant, they are losing their grip on what they knew as life as was, and that's why they're more likely to believe in witchcraft or the supernatural. So in the area of Salem, the hysteria eventually ends when teenage girls accuse some of the colony's most prominent citizens. Now the town leaders are against them. The town leaders kind of played into this and went along with it. As they're accusing the wives of these town leaders of being witches, everything kind of backs off. By then, 14 women and 5 men in Salem had been hung. 1 man had been pressed to death by stones. 54 were confessed to being witches, and more than 140 people were jailed for many months. So it has long-lasting impacts. So, what does it reveal about Salem or about Puritan society at large? The strictness, the very serious theocracy going on here is not really going to be sustainable. And therefore, it's going to kind of break down as a result of some of this. It also shows the insecurity of the Puritan leaders in keeping control. They're losing control because of the Dominion. They lose control to other Protestants, and they feel that they're trying to gain control by being so strict. They have a superstitious mindset of Puritan New England, again, because of all the issues that are going on. They have to look for some reason why their world is changing, so they go to superstition. And eventually, the colony's magistrates were willing to believe the girls' accusations because if the devil had caused New England's current troubles, they bore no responsibility for the terrible losses on the frontier. So all of these losses, when they go to King Philip's War, or they get involved with Native Americans in any other way, or the losses to the Halfway Covenant, the losses of power to England, are all not their fault. They're all these witches. So again, the Salem witch trials is important because it shows a lot of the more serious issues in New England generally, and in Salem specifically. It's the most famous one because it's superstitious and people like to study the superstitious aspects of it. But it is mostly important because of what it demonstrates about what is going on in New England, and also what will eventually lead to some of the issues in the American Revolution.